spending levels. The House is expected to pass the measure today, along with two additional resolutions, one denying funding for the health care laws and another defunding Planned Parenthood. Until that happens, lawmakers will give general speeches. And now live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
We offer you ourselves, thanking you for calling us to serve freedom's cause on Capitol Hill. Lord, you provide us with the opportunity to make a positive impact on the lives of millions. We are honored to serve you by serving our country. Use our lawmakers, who are people of faith, to do everything with decency, precision, and integrity. Remove the barriers that divide us, replacing them with such a passionate love for you and country that we will continue to find the common ground of progress. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., April 14, 2011. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Udall, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority leaders recognized.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will be in morning business until we receive the continuing resolution papers from the House of Representatives. Therefore, the time until 2 p.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the two parties. Once the resolution arrives, there will be 3 roll call votes. In relation to 2 correcting resolutions regarding health care and Planned Parenthood and passage of the long-term continuing resolution. It looks like the House will vote around 4 p.m. We thought it would be earlier, but that time has slipped. Senators will be notified when we schedule the votes. Mr. President, people can come and talk all they want. I'm very appreciative of everybody in the Senate, Democrats, Republicans, that we were able to get the consent agreement to move forward after we get the papers from the House. If there were ever an issue that had been talked to death, it's this resolution. And I think everyone realized we've talked about this about long enough. But if anyone has anything to say before 2 o'clock about this or anything else, are welcome to come to the Senate. There will be no debate. These matters will arrive, and we will vote on them as quickly as we can. Would the chair announce the morning business, please?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business with the time until 2 p.m. equally divided and controlled between the 2 leaders or their designees, with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each. The clerk will call the roll.
Equally.
Majority leader.
Equal time from both
Without
sides
objection.
during the quorum call. That, Mr. President, will be during the entire time of morning business. If there are quorum calls, it will be equally divided.
Without objection.
Mr. Akaka.
yesterday, President Obama outlined what he's describing as a responsible approach to our nation's fiscal problems. And my initial response to that characterization is that, with all due respect, Mr. President, with all due respect, the American people are not inclined to take advice on fiscal responsibility from an administration whose unprecedented borrowing and spending has done so much to create the mess that we're in. After 2 years of adding trillions to the debt and ignoring our nation's looming fiscal nightmare, the President may be right in thinking that the politically expedient thing to do is to point the finger at others, but the truly responsible thing would be to admit that his own 2-year experiment in big government has been an unmitigated disaster for the economy and itself a major, major driver of our debt, and that his inaction on the latter is the primary reason others have been forced to step forward and offer meaningful solutions of their own. And that's what most people already believe anyway, so the President's attempt to stake out the high ground in this debate was, I suspect, hard for many Americans to swallow. Despite the President's imaginative account of how we arrived at the situation we're in, the American people are well past the point of believing that Washington will be able to make good on all its promises if only we let the President and Democrats raise taxes. Americans know that we face a fiscal crisis not because we tax too little, but because we spend too much. They do not support the reckless Washington spending that has left us with record deficits and debt, and they will not support raising taxes to preserve an unsustainable status quo. Besides, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have already rejected the kind of tax hike on small business that President Obama endorsed again yesterday. So it was counterproductive for him to try to revive it. As for entitlements, the President rightly acknowledged that before we know it, the government will spend every dime it takes in just to cover the cost of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the interest on our debt. What he didn't say is that the health care bill he signed last year takes more than $500 billion out of Medicare to pay for an entirely new entitlement that could be just as unsustainable as Medicare itself, and which forces nearly 20 million more Americans into a Medicaid program which, as currently arranged, is bankrupting all of our states. So the President can claim to be a great defender of the social safety net. He may claim to stand for a nobler vision of America than those who disagree with him. But the facts speak for themselves. And when it comes to preserving the social safety net, the President's proposals simply do not address the things that have caused our most cherished entitlement programs to be unsustainable in the first place. Instead, the President would simply tinker around the edges and leave the hard work for others, passing the buck to future presidents, and that just won't cut it anymore. Americans are paying attention. They know the fiscal problems we face will not be solved by continuing the job-destroying policies that got us here. What's more, the centerpiece of the President's proposal, a tax hike on top earners, may sound appealing to those whose primary goal in this debate is to protect big government. But looking at the most recent data, the Wall Street Journal points out this very morning, that even if we were to lay claim to every taxable dollar of every single American who earns more than $100,000 a year, if we laid claim to every taxable dollar of every American who made over $100,000 a year, we still wouldn't raise enough to cover the $1.6 trillion deficit the President's budget gives us this year alone. Take all of the tax money from everybody in America who makes over $100,000 a year. Take it all, Mr. President, and you wouldn't cover the deficit for this year alone. The best way to bring down the debt and to create the climate that will lead to good private sector jobs and prosperity is not to repeat the policies of the past, but to change them. And that means cutting Washington's spending, not squeezing family budgets even more. Throughout the day today, senators will have an opportunity to debate a down payment on those cuts for the rest of the current fiscal year. So I invite them to come to the floor to discuss that proposal. After that, we'll move on to even more far-reaching debate, not about billions, but about trillions. That's the debate that will show Americans exactly where their elected representatives stand on facing up to the fiscal challenges we face. Republicans are looking forward to that debate. And that brings me to a final point. Yesterday, the President said the debate we've been having in Washington about the size and scope of government isn't about numbers on a page. It's about the kind of country we believe in. But he left out an important point, and that is this, that there are a great many people in Washington and beyond who agree with him, but who also believe in their core that the approach he's taken over the past 2 years represents the greatest single threat to the very future he envisions. America will not continue to be a great nation unless we are able to keep our promises to current and future generations and stop spending money we don't have. But the greatest obstacle to that future is not the everyday American who wants Washington to balance its checkbook, or those who look to where the President's policies have gotten us and map out a different path to the future than he would. The greatest obstacle we face is the literally crushing burden of our debt, as the President now admits. Unfortunately, the plan he outlined yesterday does not seriously address it. Americans know the stakes in this debate. They know the reason we're in this situation. It's time the President and the Democrats in Congress acknowledge it as well. The debate has shifted, and while the President doesn't seem to see that quite yet, we will not solve our problems until he stops campaigning and joins us in a serious, bipartisan effort to change not only his tone, but his direction. That's how we'll ensure that the future that he and we envision and want actually comes about. That's the only chance we have. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
So we had the Senate gaveling in this morning at 9:30 with Majority Leader Reid laying out the schedule for the day and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell just wrapping up there. He has spoken about the President's speech yesterday, laying out the plan for settling the federal deficit. Today we are expecting pretty much a waiting game for much of the day in the Senate as they stand by for action in the House on 2011 spending, that agreement that was worked out last Friday between the White House, House Republicans, and Senate Democrats. The House is expected to pass that legislation today, along with 2 other resolutions dealing with health care and one cutting funding for Planned Parenthood. For now, it's general speeches here in the Senate.
suspended.
Without objection, so ordered.
And consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
A little later today, we're going to receive from the House of Representatives a spending bill which will, if passed, fund the government for the remainder of this fiscal year, which ends on September 30th. Included in that vote today are two other votes, separate votes, which were insisted on by the House Republicans. The first vote will defund Planned Parenthood across the United States. Under Title X, a law which was proposed by President Nixon and passed by Congress and supported for over 40 years since, we have provided money across America to clinics that take care of women, children, and families who otherwise would have no place to turn. One of the recipients of those funds is Planned Parenthood. They don't receive all the funds or even a majority of the funds, but they do receive support through Title X. In my state of Illinois, Planned Parenthood has clinics in many downstate communities and as well in the Chicagoland area. In my hometown of Springfield, there's a Planned Parenthood clinic. It provides valuable services for many women in my community and state, services which otherwise they couldn't find or afford. Basic examinations by doctors who can screen for forms of cancer, for infectious disease. These are things which many women rely on, and they are valuable services. And yet the House Republicans are determined to take the funding away from Planned Parenthood. The amendment on the floor will be an amendment that addresses that issue. I will vote against that amendment. And I will vote against it because I understand that closing down Planned Parenthood as one of the recipients of Title X funds will mean that literally 69,000 women in the state of Illinois who rely on Planned Parenthood clinics will then have to struggle to find another source of medical care. And it's not always easy to do it. Many of these women are, most of them, are uninsured, and very few of them have the economic wherewithal to pay for these services. For over 90 years, Planned Parenthood has provided comprehensive, preventive, and primary health care to people, primarily the low-income, uninsured, and Medicaid recipients. Last year, 3 million people across America, that's 1% of our population, relied on Planned Parenthood's 800 health centers for cancer screening, family planning, and annual exams. Now, the House Republicans are arguing we have to stop funding Planned Parenthood because that is a way to prevent abortion. Well, let me say, we have to understand that the law for over 30 years in America has made it clear, an amendment offered by a congressman from Illinois, Henry Hyde, made it clear that no federal funds can be used for abortion services except in the most extreme and restricted cases, rape, incest, or where the mother's life is at stake. That has been the law. It's not been changed. It wasn't changed under this president or previous presidents. That has been, since the time of Henry Hyde, the guiding policy of this land, and there's no one that suggested that it be changed. Every dollar received by Planned Parenthood from the federal government is carefully restricted so that it cannot be used for abortion services. Planned Parenthood does provide abortion counseling, but only for 3% of their activities. 97% of their activities have nothing to do with it, and not a penny of the abortion counseling services can come from federal funds except in the most restricted circumstances under the Hyde Amendment. 90% of Planned Parenthood's activities are basically preventive. And let me tell you, if you don't allow women of limited means and with no insurance access to family planning, counseling, and services, it means that there will be more unintended pregnancies and, sadly, more abortions. They estimate that if we did not have Title X funding in Illinois, if we didn't provide this kind of assistance for women in lower income categories, we would have 24% more abortions because of unintended pregnancy. So what the House Republicans are seeking to do is, if it's to reduce the number of abortions, they're doing exactly the wrong way. Providing information and counseling to women so that they can plan their families and not end up with unintended pregnancies is a good way to reduce the number of abortions. That, to me, is as clear as possible, and yet they seem to be tied in knots when it comes to this and don't understand this basic causal connection. Last year, with the help of federal dollars, Planned Parenthood health centers performed 1 million cervical cancer exams, 800,000 breast exams, and 4 million tests and treatments for sexually transmitted infections like HIV. If Planned Parenthood is prohibited from receiving federal funding, which is the issue that will be on the floor, most of their health centers would be forced to close. And then what happens to the millions of women and others across America who rely on their services? Let me tell you one story, Mr. President, that I think demonstrates why this is a critical vote. It comes from the Planned Parenthood clinic in Aurora, Illinois. A woman in her early 40s, uninsured because she just lost her job. Her daughter suggested she go to Planned Parenthood for an annual checkup. During the woman's routine breast exam, a 4-centimeter by 4-centimeter lump was found in her breast. That is a sizable lump. The providers at Planned Parenthood helped the woman get a mammogram and connected her with an oncologist. Thankfully, the cancerous lump was removed and the woman recovered completely. That woman went back to the Aurora Planned Parenthood to thank them and let them know that without that care, she could have died. So when it gets down to this vote, it literally is a matter of life or death. And I hope that those who feel strongly about one issue or the other will also feel strongly about the right of every American to have access to quality care, whether you're rich or poor. Planned Parenthood provides that care in my state and across the nation. The Second Amendment, Mr. President, also is going to relate to health care. I find it hard to believe that at this moment in time, the Republicans are suggesting we should repeal health care reform. This morning we had a town meeting, and in our town meeting was a group that came from Illinois of young people who are recovering or in treatment for cancer. These are brave young children and young adults who are battling this disease. I said to them when someone suggested repealing health care reform, what they would think about a provision in health care reform which we insisted on, which said that no health insurance company can discriminate against an American under the age of 18 for a pre-existing condition. Well, they all cheered because they know, having had cancer in their lives, if they go out on the open market, the cost of their health care and health insurance, if they can buy it, would be prohibitively expensive. Health care reform that we passed here prohibits health insurance companies from discriminating against those children under the age of 18 for pre-existing conditions. Those who want to repeal it basically want to take away that protection. We also know that many families raising children of college age get worried because the kids may not have health insurance while they're looking for jobs. We extend the family coverage of people up to the age of 27 so that you can stay under your family policy when you get out of college. That gives peace of mind to a lot of families as their young son or daughter is out taking a part-time job, an internship, a trip around the world, that they're going to have health insurance until the age of 27. Repealing the law, which is what we'll vote on the floor, will remove that protection. Also, when it comes to Medicare, the prescription drug program has a gap in it called the donut hole, and a lot of seniors with expensive prescription drugs find after a few months no coverage from the government. They have to turn around and reach in their savings account and pay out thousands of dollars before that protection coverage resumes. That donut hole or gap is being closed by this bill. Those who want to repeal health care reform will repeal our efforts to make sure that people have this access to the kind of health care and prescription drugs they need to survive, be strong, and independent. So, Mr. President, I think it's a very clear vote. I've said before, I am open to revisiting health care reform, reforming health care reform, making sure that it works the way we intended it to work. As I've said before, the only perfect law that I'm aware of was written on stone tablets and carried down a mountain by Senator Moses. Every other effort since has been a human effort full of frailties and flaws, and we should always try to make it better. But the notion of wiping the slate clean and repealing health care reform would be a step backward for America. It would acknowledge that the 60 million uninsured Americans will have their ranks swell from others who can't afford to pay for health insurance and certainly can't buy good quality health insurance today. I encourage my colleagues to vote no on this amendment to repeal health care reform. We don't need to leave so many American families vulnerable, and we do need to have protections against health insurance companies which too often discriminate against those who need protection the most. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Senator from Kansas is recognized.
Mr. President, thank you.